All right, everybody. This is Scott Reed with Duck Sports Authority. I'm joined at first with Lee Wardlaw, talking recruiting first. I do want to say thank you to Ross Dellinger. You guys will notice that I'm in a different shirt. We pre-recorded that interview with Ross on Wednesday morning. I just wanted to make sure that we had a chance to talk with Ross about the changes in National Letter of Intent coming up, which does impact recruiting. So we're going to get into that with Lee, who's our recruiting writer for us. So let's talk a little bit about the big week in recruiting for Oregon. Obviously, we had a lot of different things that we came out with. What are you hearing from your side on the different kind of recruits that were there, the excitement surrounding the game, even from those who weren't there?
No doubt. I was actually texting McKay Madsen during the game, and he was just talking about how he described the atmosphere as humbling and even nuts, just highlighting the crazy noise and energy at Austin Stadium. And he's an 3-star athlete on defense for the class of 2025, and the Ducks are in his top three alongside BYU and UCLA, and had some great conversations with 4-star duo Thomas Davis Jr. and Aiden Harris on their visit. They're from Weddington High School in North Carolina, actually first cousins, but on their visit. But that was for the Michigan State game, and as well as Champ Smith talked to him about the Michigan State game too. 2027 quarterback I really like from Boca Raton.
Yeah, and I know the Harris brothers and Thomas Davis really enjoyed their visit. Were any of them really surprised by the atmosphere there?
I don't think I would say so. I think it's a well-known thing that the Austin atmosphere is really good, but I would say coming from the East Coast, coming that far, it's a completely different experience. But Champ Smith described the atmosphere or the game as the best thing in his entire life. That was pretty wild. I think he described it as one of his best ever life experiences.
One of the things I used to tell people when I was in the South, and even when I wasn't in the South around here, people ask, what's it like around Austin? I said, it is probably as close to an SEC environment as you're going to get on the West Coast, just because of the passion. I know there's only 60,000 fans, but let me tell you, you've seen the pictures of the Ohio State fans. It definitely does not sound like 60,000 fans when they're there. And it's this pre-game environment. It's during the game, everything that goes on. The fans are engaged from 6 hours before the game is when you can start tailgating, and they're engaged from the beginning to the end. I know all the recruits don't always get to see that, but that's just one of those things. Did you get a chance to talk to any of the 2025 guys? I know there's a couple of guys. Caleb Burns, I think. Obviously, Oregon has a really good shot at here. I know he's committed to Baylor. He's been to Oregon a couple of times. I think they're really, really selling him on what they could do with him in the defense. Have you had a chance to talk to any of the 2025 guys yet this week?
Unfortunately, I haven't got in contact with some of the guys who were at the Ohio State Oregon game. The people I've really been hearing back from are some of those 26s, kind of more on the East Coast, but really hoping to continue building those relationships and hearing back from the players.
Yeah, that's the one thing about doing this. It takes time to kind of always get into the current recruits. You have to have been talking to them for a couple of years ahead of time, and it's just one of those things where sometimes some of these guys on the rival side, it's not an insult. It's just the way it goes. We get a lot of national coverage as well. I know Adam Gorney's already talked to McKay Madsen. I know Rivals already talked to Jakeem Stewart, and that's the big one. Obviously, the big fish that was on campus this weekend, Jakeem Stewart. Don't know if they haven't heard. We talked about it earlier this week. We had him featured in our little picture profile of all the recruits that were on campus, but USC commit DB Brandon Lockhart, a 2026 defensive back, was also in town for the Ohio State game. I couldn't tell you the number of times he's been here. He's been here more than once. It's been an ongoing thing. I think the staff really loves him. They love his size, 6'2", 180 pounds, and great wingspan. One of those guys that right now every defensive back that starts for Oregon is under 6 foot, and I think they really liked having that kind of a defensive back. So that was one of the surprise visitors, a lot of surprise visitors. Have you had a chance to watch tape yet on the two commits that came in this week?
No, sir.
Okay. It's a funny thing because I think we can actually show it here. Let me see if I can present this. I can, but I'm not going to today. Anyway, I've watched a lot of the tape on Tupui and on Moala, and these are guys that at the end of the day, they're the kind of interior defensive linemen that you need to continue what Oregon is doing this year with Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell, and building upon that, getting those guys in the middle, that makes linebackers and defensive backs look really good. I know that Dutch Horrisk and a few others were really working on Tupui to get him locked in with Oregon. Cody Green, when I talked to him, really talked a lot about some of the guys he was recruiting, and that was one of the guys. And I think when you get those kind of guys in the middle, they call Tupui Tom Tom, that's his nickname, and he is just one of those guys that is a big physical force, and he's not going to be somebody who is timid when he gets there. And what I liked, and we can get into it, but later when Drew shows up, we'll talk a little bit more about the football. But he reminds me a lot of seeing some of the other guys that have come through that I think have a lot of talent. In this game against Ohio State that we'll talk about in a little bit, Amari Washington, who is a freshman, but a redshirt freshman, he had a sensational game. And I think he is a star in the making. And there's a lot of other guys like that. And you need them to be, you need those elite recruits in the middle. And I think Dan Lanning is doing that this year, as you know, obviously Tony Tuioti and Tosh Lupoi are also a big part of that. Are there any of the 2027 and 2026 guys, some of those elite trench guys that you're hearing about?
I'm really kind of talking with 27 and 26 skill position players. One guy I really like, Oregon hasn't offered him yet, but it's 2027 Wesley Wynn, a real speedy, impressive wide receiver defensive back out of San Francisco, California. And I would say Donovan Murph, 2026 wide receiver from Columbia. I would say Oregon is definitely a standout, but the Gamecocks have been surging with some of their players from the Palmetto State, and I put in a future cast for Murph to South Carolina.
It's an interesting thing. When I was out there, the number of people who have never been to Oregon but wore Oregon gear, and just because they knew who they were, I think some of it, for those that don't know, Maurice Morris was from South Carolina, so I think some of it there's that carryover of guys that played at Oregon that were from the South originally that came back and that name. But what's it like for you to kind of be covering in Oregon stuff in a place like South Carolina where you see a lot of Oregon interest and it's kind of unexpected sometimes? You get Clemson there, you got South Carolina there. It's pretty close to Georgia. I mean, I lived an hour and a half from Athens. It's really close to all these other schools, and yet Oregon seems to have kind of developed a brand identity in the region, which doesn't necessarily make sense given the location. What are you getting on that?
I think that Oregon is resonating heavily with recruits on the East Coast and the Southeast right now, and being able to find their way into the mix and the conversation with SEC schools and just players being pitched on the Ducks, and they really can go to bat and get any player from any part of the nation. Obviously, Texas, the Ducks are doing phenomenally there, but the Southeast, a very highly growing recruiting area for the Ducks, and I think with their new presence in the Big Ten, that they're it's always been a national brand, but Oregon, and you see the nationalization of college football, but Oregon's going to be spreading their wings, I would say.
Do you think that the move to the Big Ten is helping with some of these recruits? I know you talked to them a little bit. Did they talk about that at all?
I haven't specifically asked, but before I started the job, I kind of, I talked to a lot of recruits, and I, one of my first questions, I always reach out if Oregon, Tennessee, even if it's a team that I wasn't covering at the time, if it's a big name, I gotta ask him, how's that Tennessee offer? How's that Oregon offer? And the first thing I was always wondering, would be, what do you think about the Ducks coming to the Big Ten? And I think that's a major deal and definitely a great addition for both parties. And you see, it's a national game now, and college football is a changing environment every single day.
It is. I saw today Aaron Dunn, offensive lineman from Spanish Fork, Utah, decommitted from Utah. I know Oregon fans got excited. I think right now, if you ask me, he's likely headed to USC. If you see him start to schedule multiple visits, then that might change things. I know Oregon liked him a lot. I believe they were probably third at the first commitment, so I would suspect right now that it is still going to be a USC battle for him. But I think this game against Ohio State, which we're about to get into, and I'll flip over to that in just a second. This game against Ohio State, I think, opened some eyes. I think going into this week, a lot of people thought that they thought of Oregon similar to what they used to think of Oregon, that it's a good team with some skilled players, but wouldn't be able to handle these big physical teams in the trenches for a full game. They might be able to hang for a couple of quarters, keep it close because of offense, because of some big plays, but I think they saw some things that they didn't expect to see. And it's going to resonate not necessarily with some 2025 guys. I think it's going to resonate with 2026 and beyond in a way that attracts a different level of athlete than it was attracting before. Oregon is always going to get elite skill players, always. It's just who they are. But I think getting the elite guys in the middle, the elite defensive linemen, the elite offensive linemen, under Mario Cristobal, they showed they could get a couple of elite offensive linemen. They couldn't build 6 and 7 deep on the offensive line. They couldn't build a 6-7 man rotation that was all elite. It was a few projects thrown in there where the elite guys kind of helped take over a little bit. I think that is going to change, and I think this game really did a lot for that. So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about the big game, right? It was a big game. Oregon came out, and it was a slugfest from beginning to end. And I liked if you didn't get a chance, anybody, to watch the Ducks versus them for this week, do, because he likens this to a heavyweight title fight where you got to be good at the jabs, but you've got to know when to throw the big play, what he called the haymaker. That's the big play. That's the throw to Tez Johnson. That's the throw to Evan Stewart down the field. That's that corner pass to Evan Stewart for the touchdown. Those are the kinds of haymakers that he was talking about. You take your jabs, you take your 5-yard runs, you take your quick outs, you take your quick slants, you take those things, and those are your jabs, and then you throw your haymakers when you can. Defensively, the jabs are, stop them on first and second down and force some thirds where they have to make a choice, and then you throw your haymaker on defense. Not a lot of turnovers in this one. They did get the forced fumble, and should have probably had an interception. So we'll kind of leave it at that. What did you see from your, you get to watch it on TV, so it's a little bit different. What was your view?
I was at my grandparents live out in the country in South Carolina, in rural Columbia. So I was out there, and I saw a defensive line that was really making a statement. Is the thing that stood out to me the most about the Ducks. Always skill position team flying around, but this is a Ducks that really nailed it home on defense, and that was the biggest takeaway for me. And I would say this Ohio State-Oregon game, there was lots of SEC action, lots of stuff going on in the college football world, but that was really the standout game in this whole new Big Ten, nationalized Big Ten. This Oregon-Ohio State game had the real feel of a college football Super League, or almost like a Premier League type feel. I really loved the NBC broadcast. I love not being distracted with a scoreboard banner below with all the other games, just locking in on the Ducks and the Bucks.
And the other thing I noticed, and people that looked at the stats would know this, the Oregon outrushed Ohio State, which Ohio State's last, I think, 4 losses in the last 3 years have all been when they've been outrushed. 3 of those by Michigan, now by Oregon. And even if you go back to Oregon at Ohio State in 2021, Oregon outrushed Ohio State. I think that was surprising because a lot had been made of the duo of TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins and how good they have been. 8 yards of carry between them and dominant in every game they've played. And Oregon didn't stop them, but and this is a stat that I threw out there in our 5th quarter, I believe, they did hold Ohio State to 19 yards on 12 carries in the second half. And I saw somebody question why they didn't run the ball more, because they were getting stuffed on 1st and 2nd down and they had to throw the ball. That's why they were running into a stout defensive line in the second half. I think the rotations were starting to really take effect in the second half, where the defensive line was fresher and able to make some plays and get some stops behind the line of scrimmage. The big sack that Mateo had, I know that Will Howard just fell down, and that was probably smart on his part because he probably saved 2 or 3 seconds of time on that sack late in the game. But that sack obviously hurts the yards a little bit on the rushing. They were still not great in the second half on rushing. I think Judkins had 2 carries for 6 yards, and Henderson had 4 carries for 9 or 12. It was really low for both of them. So it wasn't just the sacks that hurt the numbers. And I think when you look back at what winning football is, running the ball, stopping the run. That's how you win football games, especially in the Big Ten and or the SEC. You don't win it by big shootout, throwing the ball back and forth where everybody's throwing for 500 yards. It's run the ball better than the other team, keep them from running the ball better, and you're likely to win those games. It's very rare that you're going to see Oregon outrush Ohio State and still lose unless there's some real big defensive lapses in the secondary. And I think for Oregon fans who watched last year and watched Washington a couple of times, take advantage of those secondary lapses and get the wins because they couldn't quite get over that hump. That's the difference this year. The defensive backfield is better this year than it was a year ago. It may not be able to stop an Ohio State from getting the 327 yards passing they got, but it was able to make plays when it needed to make plays. And I think that was a major factor in the outcome as well. What do you see when you look at a guy like Jordan James?
I mean, just a stud running back, and just the way he runs the ball is powerful and it's entertaining, and just love the way he plays the game. And he's been a lot of fun to watch this season.
All right, we're joined by Drew. Hey, Drew, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How's everybody doing, fellas?
Good. Drew, if you haven't met, this is Lee Wardlaw. He does a lot of our recruiting conversations with people. He's the one that I've tasked with trying to get more interviews for us so that we can kind of improve our recruiting coverage. But we're talking a little bit about the game now. We were just talking about kind of the thing that I was most impressed by offensively is the fact that Oregon outrushed Ohio State. Ohio State came in with, Bash and Dash is, I think, the nickname they used. And Oregon was able to outrush Bash and Dash with one running back, really. I know Noah Whittington gave us some spells, especially late in the game on that last drive, but it was Jordan James. It was the Jordan James show. And I think that was probably the difference. As I said to Lee, you don't win unless you can run the ball better than the other team and keep the other team from running. That is how you win in the Big Ten. That's how you win in the SEC. And I think that's the reason prior to this season that a lot of Big Ten folks thought, is Oregon ready for this? They've never been in that situation before. Well, they are ready for this, and they showed it, I think, against Ohio State.
Yeah, I agree with that. I had me scared for a minute when TreVeyon Henderson is busting off big runs in the first quarter, and it looked a little bleak there. But like I said, it starts up front, and when you're able to run the ball, you're able to do a lot more stuff off of that. And like you said, I didn't think it would just be a one-headed monster like that with Jaron James, like it's usually a two-headed monster. But I guess that's what they've been spelling them for this whole year, is to wait until, they got to give them upwards of 15, 20 carries in order to get us through the game.
And I believe he had 23 carries. And, I mentioned this before you came on. The Duck defense held Ohio State to 19 yards on 12 carries in the second half. And that is the difference in the game. If TreVeyon Henderson is running in the second half like he did in the first, I don't think it ends up a 1-point game. I think it ends up an 8 or 9-point game the other way. So the defensive line really stepped up. Did you get a chance? Because I did. I watched Amari Washington a lot, and I think that guy is a star in the making. Probably next year he's going to be an elite defensive tackle in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I did, and it's just crazy because you watch these guys, and sometimes you have to see them line up against some real talent or some other people with talent to be able to assess it. And anytime you're able to shine like that and make plays and get in there consistently, you can really see like, okay, this guy can really play, this guy can really go, he has a motor, and he's up there with some of the top people.
I mean, we knew Derek Harmon was going to be good, but there was one particular play where Washington just blew over the starting guard and just blew him up. And when you see a freshman making that kind of a play against Ohio State, that's promising for the future. And I think, Oregon got 2 big commits. I don't know if you saw that, the 2 big defensive tackle commits on Sunday and Monday. And that just extends that elite defensive front that Oregon is building. And it's not just 26 guys. They've got 25 guys. They've got Tony Cumberland in 2026. They had Aiden Breland last year. And it goes on and on, the amount of defensive line talent that they're building. And that is what makes your linebackers and defensive backs look better, is when those guys can stop the run, get some pressure without using 5 and 6 man rushes. I think that's a big difference. That was the other thing I noticed, by the way. Not a ton of blitzes. Ducks didn't need to blitz to get pressure.
Yeah,
So let's go ahead.
my bad. And I was just gonna say, like you said, I didn't see a lot of 5 or 6 man blitzes, and so that's good. That means you can stay back in coverage. That means those guys are getting to him and causing him some disruption. And those are when you got some guys up there where you can say, "Hey guys, you 4 get after him. We're not gonna give you any help."
Absolutely. What did you think of, and we'll ask this, I asked Dellinger about it really briefly at the end. I'm not too upset with the play call, the 12-man on the field. It is a live ball penalty, and that was the live ball penalty rules. Is it any different than if you instruct a defensive back to tackle a wide receiver if he beats you in coverage? No, it's the same thing. Is it cheating? Technically speaking, anytime you violate a rule, it's cheating, I guess. But I don't want to use that term because I don't think that's right in this scenario. Cheating means you did something in a nefarious manner that was against the rules in a way. He took advantage of the rules. I'm not that upset about it. It's just one of those things that I guarantee you it's not the first time this has happened, but it's the first time it's happened involving Ohio State.
I agree with you there. The thing I tell people, I've been in the room with coaches, and they're always trying to figure out, how can we, and I wouldn't say get over, but it's like, how can we manipulate this rule to our benefit? Or like, the rule is in there for a reason, it's written in there for a reason. But I feel like the really good coaches are looking at rules and they're like, hey, well, so if it's like this and we do this, then we're still within the confines of that rule, right? And at the end of the day, nobody cares about that. The people that are trying to win games don't care about it. They're trying to get out of there with the W. And people look at these rules and practice these situations for weeks and months and years on end just for it to come up one time. And this one time that it pops up, and I'm still a little leery whether he did it on purpose or not. And I don't know the whole story. I haven't looked up too much. But it's stuff like that. When it happens, you look like a genius. And even if say it would have backfired, then we're sitting here talking about, well, if they make a catch, if somehow miraculously they run a slant and make a catch, and then they have the clock stop for them, then we're over here saying, oh, well, Dan Lanning can't win the game again. Why did they do? So you stick your neck out there and you're vulnerable for a situation like this. And when it does come out your way, you feel really good about it, and you take all the praise that you can get.
In some ways, if people didn't notice, Jabbar Muhammad knocked down the pass. It would have actually been better had there not been a penalty there, because it would have been 4th and 15 instead of 3rd and 10. And that changes your play call. That changes the structure. It may be a Hail Mary time because it's 4th down. But it is what it is. There was a penalty. It did cost them 5 yards, and it did give them 4 seconds off the clock. And just for what it's worth, any live ball foul can have the same consequence. So unless the NCAA goes and decides to adjust all the rules on live ball penalties, as an example, offsides. If the defense, let's say, jumps offsides on purpose, baits the quarterback into throwing the ball deep, the quarterback throws an incomplete pass and wastes 6 seconds, it's a 5-yard penalty. And the 6 seconds are gone. Is the NCAA going to go back and clarify that as well? Or is it only going to be on the 12th man? And I think because you can sort of see maybe more intent in that illegal man on the field part, maybe you stop at that. But this is something that can happen on any live ball foul. It could happen for the offense. They could purposely, if it's 3rd and 15 and they're trying to get a few extra seconds off the clock, purposely run an illegal shift, run the pass play, take the penalty, have another 3rd down. These things can happen. And I think big picture, this happens all the time. We just haven't seen it in a big time game like this. If it happened between Rice and SMU, would anybody care? No. All right, I'm off the high horse on that. Let's turn ourselves to looking at the Purdue game coming up. I think the biggest question I had for people this week, and we did it in the roundtable, so I'll let you guys answer it just like we did in the roundtable, and we can create this our own roundtable. Do you think Oregon suffers a letdown this week? Go ahead, Lee. I'll let you start.
No,
Nice.
definitely
What
not.
do you think?
I think no as well. You look at what Purdue's been able to do against number 2 teams over the last, I think it's 8 or so years. They've taken down a couple. But I don't think there's a letdown after this. I think last week's win was huge. I think them going into a short week, into a Friday, I think coaches will have them prepared, and I think they'll do just fine.
I said it on the board and I'll say it again today. The one thing I think about when I think about a letdown is we have a different philosophy this year that we're seeing. We're seeing a little bit more, we'll just call it time management for star players, not spending as much time on the field. So how much do we get load management on this game? How much do we see a Jaden Lamar come in as opposed to keeping Jordan James in there? And how much do we see a couple of extra linemen rotating in that we wouldn't otherwise have seen against Ohio State? That is where it may look like a letdown to people not paying attention to who's rotating in and out, but it may not be the blowout everybody's expected. It may not be a 50-7 type game. It may end up being a 42-17 game because you're getting some other reserves, some playing time that wouldn't otherwise get there. I think from the outside, when you look at the final score, nobody's going to say letdown, but when you're watching the result and you're seeing Purdue stick with Oregon for, say, 2 quarters or 2.5 quarters, and all of a sudden Oregon pulls away at the end, people might say, oh, they had a letdown. I don't think it's going to be a letdown as so much as it's going to be some load management, some other players getting a chance to play against this team. And they've got a quarterback that's played a half a game, right? Ryan Clark has played a half a game, and we don't know a lot about him. We've got a little bit of tape, but we're going to see if what he did against Illinois is real or if it was Illinois being unprepared for a guy like Ryan Clark. They were prepared for Hudson Card, and Hudson Card can move, but not like Ryan Clark. So I think that's my thought. What do you see as the key storyline heading into this game?
I'll go ahead and start. Just the key storyline heading into this game, I think, will just be how do they handle this newfound level of success? And like you said, um, are they going to be one of those teams that comes in and bulls over people? Or are they going to be kind of, hey, we're number 2, you should lay down for us, get out of the way? And then now I think the spotlight is more so on Dylan Gabriel. So now he's back in the Heisman conversation. And so people are going to say, okay, is this guy worthy of the Heisman? Let's see what he does. And so now you got to see offensively, is he throwing for 300 plus yards a game? How many touchdown passes is he having? What does that offense look like now that they're a little bit more comfortable in pass pro and running? So I think those are some of the big storylines going into this game.
Well, I would say whether or not Oregon covers the spread.
Yeah, that's going to be a big one.
Purdue is known to hang in with teams, and you saw a 50-49 against ranked Illinois, but Oregon's looking real strong this year, and you see a defense where the defensive line and they're playing more physical. They're always stacked with skill players, but this is a physical, this real Oregon. And, Dan Lanning is a coach who came from Georgia. I think that's something really important is bringing that defensive mindset from Georgia and the SEC.
All right. What's your score predictions?
I would say I think they're going to cover. So I would give it, like you said, I think they're going to get up early and let off the gas. Also, the thing is, Purdue, they fired their offensive coordinator from 2 weeks ago. Ryan Walters is kind of not fighting for his job, but he's kind of in that kind of zone a little bit. I would go ahead and say I'll give it a 45-16.
What you got, Lee?
I'll go ahead and say Ducks 49-21.
All right. I went with 42-17, and I think the Ducks will have a comfortable enough lead to go on a little bit of, I don't want to call it cruise control, but put in some of the reserves in the fourth quarter, and that's when you see a late touchdown to go from a 42-10 to a 42-17. I don't think anybody that looks at the box score is going to think it was even close. I think it may look close on to some fans, but I don't think that Purdue has the defense to stop Oregon's offense. And as good as Ryan Clark looked in his half against Illinois, I don't think Illinois' defense is anywhere close to what Oregon is right now. Defensive line, linebackers, defensive backs. I just don't know that Purdue has it. I think missing Jordan Birch might hurt a little bit because he's really good at setting the edge. But I also thought Mateo Uyunglele played really well on Saturday against Ohio State. And I think that's going to bode well for Oregon. They've got some players that maybe they could get in an extra game this week if they decide to. A guy like Blake Purchase has only played for 3 games, and right now it looks like they're trying to keep his red shirt alive, so they could put him in. Jaden Moore, he's played in all 6 games, and I think he's going to have some plays in the fourth quarter. That's another guy on the edge that I like, that I think is going to do well. So I don't think it's close. I'm not going to predict to cover the spread. It started at 27.5. Oregon is 1-4 against the spread when favored. So, and that was against Oregon State. Every other game they had a big spread. They did not cover. So I'm not going to quite call them to cover the 27.5 points, but I do like them in a fairly close win. Let's turn real quick. We'll just talk kind of about the rest of the season. Obviously, I think this was a preview of the Big Ten championship game. What you guys got?
Yes. They'll be playing again.
I think they'll for sure be playing down the line. I think it's kind of tough in the Big Ten. Ohio State's going to need to take care of business and going to need some help. There's some good teams that are still rolling right now, as far as Indiana, and a couple other ones. But I can see a couple people having one loss, so they'll come down to some tiebreakers, who played who, this and that. I'm sure we'll see them down the line. I'm not going to necessarily say in the Big Ten championship, maybe in the playoff, how it'll shake down. But I know we'll definitely see them again this season.
Ohio State does play Indiana this season in a regular season game, so we're going to find out. To me, that's the game that's going to decide it, because I don't think Penn State gets all the way through. I believe they also play Ohio State. I don't think they get all the way through without a loss. I think Ohio State still controls their destiny, but we'll see. And I agree, even if it's not in the Big Ten championship game, they are likely to meet in the playoff at one way or another, unless there's a massive upset in the first round somewhere where one of these teams gets knocked off, which I don't see. Any parting shots? Anything to talk about that you want to kind of hit in real quick?
Yeah, Jaron Sagapulele. I think that Oregon's a school he likes, but I think his commitment to Cal is solid. And I'm not sure whether he's actually going to be visiting Oregon, but we'll continue to monitor that as it develops.
Yeah, if he visits, I think he flips. If he doesn't visit, that's a pretty clear sign that it's not going to happen. That's to me on him where we're at on recruiting with him.
No doubt.
And by the way, the top quarterback from Georgia class just decommitted today as well, and I think there is a small chance Oregon pursues him.
Lewis?
Yeah.
Julian Lewis. Okay.
No, not Julian Lewis. Not Julian Lewis from Georgia. anyway, there's a chance.
Yeah.
He's an elite quarterback, number 3 ranked quarterback in the class. 2026 guy, not 2025. So I think there's a chance that Oregon goes after him, but I don't know that they're at the top of his list. So we'll see. We'll monitor that. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week. What you got, Drew? Anything? Parting shots?
I'm just excited to see how the season will be moving forward with Evan Stewart. If he'll get some more balls, if he'll get some more looks, what's going to happen with Trayshawn Holden? Whether he'll kind of get put in the back seat a little bit, or if he'll be able to get that spot back and continue his dominance. But the thing about people being out or getting in trouble or being injured is that you get to see the younger guys or other guys see if they can step up and if they'll be a new household name. So I'm just excited for that situation, and I was excited for his breakout game against Ohio State, and so I'll be looking for him to make more plays this year.
And I think you were around for one of those breakout players that got his chance because of a disciplinary issue, right?
Definitely.
Michael James. For those obviously Oregon fans know that Michael James got his start because of what happened at Boise State. I don't expect that the Trayshawn Holden punishment will be anywhere near as severe. It was a lapse in judgment for sure, an emotional reaction to an emotional moment. I don't know what was said. Nobody ever reacted for no reason, but that doesn't make the reaction okay. It was a bad reaction. It's happened. I've done some stupid stuff myself when I was I was playing for the base team in the Marine Corps, and I was playing receiver. A defensive back was interfering with me all day, and it wasn't even close. And he just kept laughing, saying the ref didn't see it. The ref didn't see it. So at another time, I body slammed him, and he was crying when he stood up and said something. I said, "Well, the ref didn't see it," and then I turned around and there was the ref. So I was ejected from the game. Fortunately, we won. It did not cost us the game. But these things happen when 20, 21-year-olds have emotions. Sometimes they lose control of them. Discipline is necessary. I don't think it'll be as severe as what happened with LeGarrette Blount. I think it'll be probably a game, maybe a half a game. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he's already been running 150 miles this week. That may be his discipline for the week. I'm not sure. But I think we'll see him again. And I think this was a chance to see. And what hasn't happened yet, Gary Bryant Jr. has not played this year. So if all 3 of those guys are out there, plus Tez Johnson, that's a scary, scary situation, because then you've got 4 elite wide receivers that can burn and move the ball down the field. How do you defend that? That's the story is what Oregon's offense looks like by the end of the year, I think is the kind of thing I'm watching, is how much better can they get? All right, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys sign off. Ali, I know it's late for you. I tried to get us all on at the same time. You're there at 10:30. We're here at 7:30, and we want to make sure we try to get everybody together at least once a week. We will do this again next week, everybody.
Thank
I'm
you.
good. Take care.
Thank you, Scott.
All right, thanks, guys. Good.